Good afternoon, students. As you know, the time has changed from today onwards. So, therefore, a very good afternoon. Students, yesterday we have learned some important topics such as the events in sexual reproduction, right? I think you remember and you recap. The three events in sexual reproduction are first, the pre fertilization events, which includes gametogenesis and gamete transfer, then the fertilization, which is also called syngamy, and then we have post fertilization changes. These are the three events that occur in sexual reproduction. Now, remember yesterday we have talked about the meiocytes, where we have seen the meiocytes are those cells, the mother cells, where the chromosome number is diploid, and there it undergoes a reduction division to form a haploid cells. Now, when we come to gamete transfer is a very, very important activity in sexual reproducing organism, because the young one that has to be formed or that has to be born, it is only by the fusion of these two gametes, that is the male gamete and the female gamete. So the two gametes must be brought together physically. As a result of that, a diploid zygote will be formed. Right? In many of the organisms, the male gamete is motile and the female gamete is stationary. Right? But in some fungi and algae, both types of gametes are motile. Right? You can see here, in some type of fungi and in algae, both the type of gametes, the male gametes and the female gametes are motile. They move, right? And also in plants like algae, bryophytes and pteridophytes, the water is as a medium through which the gamete transfer takes place. It is the gamete, it is a water through which the gametes will move. So therefore water plays a very, very important role, and as a result we have learned in class 11 that most of these bryophytes etc. they are found near the swamps and streams. So because they need water for the process of fertilization. And also you can know that these organisms produce a very large number of gametes, especially the male gametes. The male gametes are very large, and when these male gametes are produced a very large number, and why is it so? Because they are lost during the transfer, right? So they are lost during the transfer. So therefore, to compensate this loss to the during transfer, they need to produce large number of gametes. Now, what about flowering plants? Angiosperms, they have the male gametes in the pollen grains. The pollen grains are those structures which are formed in the stamens. I think we already studied in class 11, and we will be learning in other further chapters also. So in this, there the male gametes are present in the pollen grains, and these pollen grains will be transferred during the process of pollination, that we know that these pollen grains are brought about to the surface of the stigma during pollination, right? So as you can see here in this diagram of 1.7, we see the gametes. The first one, the homogametes. Yesterday we have learned the two gametes are fused, then we got the zygote here, and again the new individual is formed. Now when this zygote is formed, what is that process? The process is called fertilization. So fertilization is nothing but the process where the male and female gametes fuse together to form a zygote. So zygote is diploid because the two gametes are haploid. So therefore the gametes are haploid, and then the zygote is in diploid stage. Right. So this result. So I told you yesterday, every sexually reproducing organism has to start its life cycle with the zygote. So it is diploid because it contains two sets of chromosomes. Okay. Now there is also some organisms like rotifers, honeybees, and some lizards, and some birds like turkey birds. There is another process where the female gamete actually develops into new organism without the fertilization. and therefore it is known as parthenogenesis. So parthenogenesis is a term that we refer to where the female gamete develops into a new organism without fertilization. So they're developing even without fertilization. So there is no fertilization in that process, right? So when we talk about fertilization, okay, we know there are two types of fertilization. That is external fertilization and internal fertilization. What do you mean by external and internal fertilization here? The term external refers to the medium where the fusion of the male and female gamete takes place. So in external fertilization, the medium is water, that is outside the body of organism. Right. If it occurs outside the body of an organism, so preferably a female organism, therefore it is said to be called as a external fertilization. And suppose it occurs inside the body of female, it is said to be called as a internal fertilization. Right. And you know, one more difference between these two is in case of external fertilization, a large number of gametes are released into the surrounding medium. A large number of gametes are released into the surrounding medium only to enhance the chances of fertilization. Okay, whereas in the case of internal fertilization, the number of eggs produced is very less. That is, the female gamete, when it produces the what do you call eggs and all, ova, that is a female gamete, it produces very less, whereas the male gametes are very large in number as compared to the female gamete, so that it can go and fuse to the female gamete, right? And we can see the major disadvantage, no? See, in the case of external fertilization, there is always a threat of predators, you know, the threat of predators, because it is not safe. The fertilized, what you call the first fertilized zygote are not safe. They will be usually having a threat to the predators. The predators will be able to eat them, right? So in that case it is not safe, whereas in the case of internal fertilization we find that most of the zygote is usually safe in the body, and therefore that will be taken care of, okay children, that is a very important point, okay, so to understand. Now let us go into the other aspect of our lesson, right? Right. And that is the embryo, that is post fertilization events. Post fertilization events, right? Post fertilization events are those events which are formed after the zygote. The events that occur after the zygote are known as post-fertilization events. And in the post-fertilization events, the fate of the zygote depends upon the life cycle of an organism. Usually, in the case of a haplontic organism, the zygote divides by meiosis. What is that? In haplontic organism, the zygote divides by meiosis. Okay, so that to form the haploid spores, and then they will grow into a haploid individuals. But what about in diplontic organisms, like humans, like other animals, or maybe plants? In them, the zygote divides by mitosis, and this mitosis occurs later on. It develops into diplontic organisms. So therefore we can say the zygote is the vital link that ensures the continuity of the species between organisms from one generation to the next. So it's a very important link. Okay, I told you, I am repeating once again, the zygote is a starting phase of all the sexually reproducing organisms. So in that way, they will find that the zygote is a vital link in the ensures the continuity of the species. Right. Now what happens after the what they call zygote? Naturally, the zygote develops into embryo, and that process is known as embryogenesis. So process of development of embryo from the zygote is termed as embryogenesis. Okay, embryogenesis is a very important stage as well, because it involves cell division, particularly in mitosis, and also it involves cell differentiation. Right. What happens in these two stages? There will be the number of cells will be increased, the cells will be getting differentiated, which in future will be giving rise to future tissues and future organs. Okay children. Now Even we know that animals we can categorize into two categories based upon the development of zygote that takes place outside the body of the female parent or inside. We call them as oviparous and viviparous. Ova means egg laying, whereas viviparous means what you call young ones. So animals that lay unfertilized or fertilized eggs are known as oviparous animals, whereas viviparous is a term that refers to organisms that give birth to young ones. Okay, so these actually the oviparous animals, like in the case of birds and reptiles, usually the egg is covered with a hard calcareous shells. Okay, and it depends upon the environment where the egg hatches into a new organism after the incubation period, right? Whereas in the case of all mammals and other organisms where internal fertilization occurs, the embryo, that is the embryo is very safe inside, it develops into the young one, okay, and it is fed by the mother. All such events mark the what you call development of embryo inside it. Okay, children, so that is a very very important aspect of the embryogenesis. Now what about in the case of plants? In plants, okay, that is especially in the flowering plants, the zygote is formed inside the ovule, isn't it? Ovule that we will study in the next chapter. What is ovule? Where we have the what you call as a zygote. So it is an internal fertilization even in the case of what you call flowering plants. And then after the fertilization is completed, we know there are certain changes that occurs in the flower, right? So what are the first change that you will see? The what you call sepals and petals they just wither off because there is no need of now. So as soon as the fertilization is over, the sepals and petals they simply wither off, and the ovary will transform into fruit. That's a very very important event. Fruits, which are namely called as fertilized that is ovule. The fertilized ovary develops into fruit, and the ovule develops into seeds. The fertilized ovule will develop into seeds, whereas the fertilized ovary will develop into what you call fruit. I know the fruit has a wall which is called as the thick wall called pericarp. Peri means surrounding and carp means carpal because it is a female part. So usually the fruit has come from the female part which is called a carpal or pistil. So therefore the surrounding part is called as a pericarp. So this pericarp, okay, protects the fruit from the outside, which is usually protective in function. And what is inside the fruit? The seeds. That is the fertilized ovules. And these ovules, what happens? These ovules can develop into new organism. So as you can see here, figure 1.8, where we can find all the fruits are there, right? What is the S? What do you call S letter denotes? The S letter denotes the seeds, isn't it? And the P letter indicates the pericarp. You can see in all the different types of fruits, all these. So usually fruits is a term that is usually related. Okay, children. So therefore, this is for today's topic, and that is the end of this chapter of reproduction in organism. I hope that you have understood very well. Stay home, right? Stay at home and stay safe. Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you for being with me. Thank you.